When you dive into the conversation about climate action, it can feel like you're lost in this maze of competing slogans, big economic ideas, and a lot of finger pointing. So today, we're going to try and untangle some of the biggest, most conflicting ideas that shape how we all think about our planet's future. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with a classic environmental slogan and its lesser-known opposite. Then we'll get into a major economic debate, map out the divide over who's responsible for what, and even explore the psychology of it all. And then we'll ask the big question, how do we actually find a way forward? All right, let's jump right in. This first part kicks off with a phrase I'm pretty sure you've heard before. It's a phrase that really became the foundation for decades of environmental action. So, back in the 60s and 70s, this was way more than just a catchy phrase. It was a powerful call to arms for a whole new grassroots movement. The idea was simple, but really profound. You have to understand the big picture, the health of the entire planet, but you start the change right where you are, literally in your own backyard. And the philosophy here is just incredibly empowering, isn't it? It takes a massive, kind of abstract problem like climate change and makes it something you can actually touch. It says, hey, if enough of us recycle or conserve energy or support local green projects, all these little individual ripples will join together and create this powerful wave of global change. And this is a perfect illustration of that TGL idea in practice. You see a global problem, our dependence on fossil fuels, and right there is a real, tangible, local solution. A community deciding to generate its own clean power is think globally, act locally in a nutshell. And that question gets right to the core of the main criticism. I mean, what happens when one city passes tough environmental laws and a polluting factory just decides to pack up and move to a town with weaker rules? That's what people call emissions leakage. The first community looks cleaner, sure, but for the planet as a whole, it's a wash. So, this brings us to the complete counter-argument. Think locally, act globally. The people who support this view say, look, greenhouse gases don't carry passports. They mix all together in our shared atmosphere. So the only truly effective solutions have to be these big, top-down international agreements that create the same rules for everyone. This slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got TGAL. It's all about that grassroots energy, empowering local folks. But it has this huge risk of just shuffling the problem around. On the other side, TLAG is aiming for that big global fix. But man, it can be painfully slow, super expensive, and really struggle to work for all the different needs of different countries. It's a classic trade-off, and there is no easy answer. Let's keep going, because this tension between the local and the global, it builds into an even deeper debate. We're not just talking about our actions anymore, but about the very engine of our modern world, economic growth. So in one corner, we have green growth. This is the really optimistic view. It's the idea that we can have our cake and eat it too. It basically puts all its faith in human ingenuity, arguing that we can decouple economic growth from environmental harm through amazing new tech. Next-gen solar, circular economies, AI-driven efficiency. It's all about making the system we have work smarter, not ditching it. And then in the total opposite corner, you have degrowth. This idea comes from a much more skeptical place. It says, hey, infinite growth on a finite planet, that's just a fantasy. It argues that wealthy nations have already grown way too much and now need to strategically shrink their use of materials and energy. The focus shifts from just getting more stuff to improving well-being for everyone, all while staying within our planet's limits. So we're left with this huge fundamental question. Can we innovate our way out of this crisis by tweaking the economic system we have? Or is that very system, with its constant demand for more and more growth, the actual root of the problem? And this debate, this leads us right to another major fault line. Who's been doing most of the consuming and who really bears the responsibility? This whole economic tension, it's not just some academic theory. It plays out in this incredibly charged, real-world debate about history, about fairness, and about a deep divide that really splits our planet in two. When you hear about international climate talks, you often hear these terms. The global north, think of the wealthy, industrialized countries, and the global south, the developing and emerging economies. The thing is, they come to the table with completely different histories, and because of that, totally different priorities. And that creates a massive amount of friction. And this number is pretty much the crux of the whole argument. Research shows that the nations of the global north are responsible for a staggering 92% of all the excess greenhouse gas emissions that have built up in our atmosphere since the industrial age really kicked off. So the argument from the global south is all about climate justice. They look at our atmosphere as a shared resource, a global common, that's been almost entirely used up by the north on its way to getting rich. So now, as the South tries to build up its own economies and lift its people out of poverty, they're being told the world's carbon budget is pretty much gone. You can see how, from their perspective, it feels like showing up to a huge feast after the first guests have already eaten almost everything. Trying to wrap your head around these enormous debates about global systems, economic futures, historical injustice, it can be completely and totally exhausting. And that brings us to the really human psychological side of all this. How do we even cope with it? That constant stream of news about record heat or devastating wildfires or vanishing species, it can trigger what psychologists are now calling ecological grief. And it's not just some abstract idea. It's a deep, gut-level sense of loss for the natural world. It's like mourning for a planet that feels like it's slipping through our fingers. And these feelings are incredibly powerful. It's the sadness you feel when you see a picture of a bleached coral reef, the anger you feel at inaction, or that creeping fear for what the future holds. And besides just being emotionally draining, this feeling of helplessness can become a kind of paralysis. It can kill the very motivation we need to actually do something. So how do we fight back against that paralysis? Well, psychologist C.R. Snyder gives us a framework for what he calls constructive hope. And this isn't just passive wishing, it's an active process. It means first, having a clear goal of the world you actually want. Second, figuring out a believable path to get there. And third, finding the drive inside yourself to take that first step. So in this view, hope isn't just a feeling, it's a strategy. Okay, so after digging into these clashing slogans, these warring economic ideas, and these internal battles we have between grief and hope, where does that leave us? What is the path forward? Well, a lot of the research points to a really powerful antidote. While our individual actions definitely matter, it turns out that engaging in collective action, that means working with other people toward a shared goal, that's what's been shown to restore our sense of agency and fight off that despair. It's the difference between changing a light bulb by yourself and joining your neighbors to campaign for a community solar project. Acting together, that's what builds hope. And that really leaves us with the ultimate challenge. We've seen all these tensions, local versus global, growth versus balance, historical debts versus future needs. Each of these different perspectives offers a different kind of compass, a different way to read the map. And it seems like the hardest part isn't just choosing a path, but all of us trying to agree on which direction is north in the first place.